Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Trump and his tariffs. Trump is back. He's officially back with more tariffs. He's going to be putting 25% tariffs on all automakers, which includes Tesla, GM, and others. And the market is reacting negatively, actually really negatively, and stocks are crashing today, so we're going to break everything down in simple terms. So stick around to the end, and yeah, hope you enjoy. So here I've pulled up the stock screener for the day, and as you can see, a lot of names are red today, including Nvidia right here. Broadcom is red, AMD is red, Google is red. Pretty much all the tech names are red, and actually a lot of stocks in like the outer ring of this chart are green, and these are the recession-proof stocks, as we like to call them, which are basically companies that will continue to run well even in a recession or a potentially challenging environment because of tariffs and all that. And these stocks include stuff like Pepsi, like people are still going to be drinking soda even if it's a recession, or Starbucks. I guess people are still going to be drinking coffee even though it's kind of overpriced over there, but that's a story for another day. Obviously, we have stuff like Procter and Gamble, we have Philip Morris, and yeah, basically just a ton of these companies that would survive, if we got into a tough macro environment, which a lot of people are worried about, and that's why we're selling off some of the more speculative stocks. Not really speculative, but some of the more cyclical and I guess risk on stocks like Nvidia and Tesla and most of the red stocks in here. They're all tech or semiconductor, and those are the ones that tend to be sold off the most aggressively on these red days. However, they also are the ones that get the biggest gap up on green days, so yeah, there is some merit to that. But today they're all deep in the red. So actually, Nvidia was down probably the worst out of all these names, really. And there is a reason for that. Nvidia did get a headline earlier that was talking about China kind of encouraging Chinese companies like Alibaba and others to avoid using Nvidia chips because, how they say it, because of environmental reasons. And to me, that kind of makes no sense at all. I think China is kind of using that as a negotiatory tactic, kind of like how Trump is using his tariffs in a similar way. And yeah, I think that's just a bunch of nonsense. And hopefully, that doesn't mean too much for Nvidia. Hopefully, this is just a buy the dip opportunity. Um, yeah, because Nvidia hasn't been doing too well this year, and today only adds on to that loss. And if I just switch to the year-to-date performance, we can see Nvidia is down 15% year-to-date, and its close friend Broadcom is down 22%. So yeah, they're definitely not doing great, and hopefully Trump takes notice of this news from China and tries to do something about it, or maybe it gets resolved eventually. I don't think that Alibaba or any other big Chinese companies are going to stop using Nvidia because it's simply just the best chip you can get. Um, when it comes to implementing um, tech into your, or when it comes to implementing chips into your tech, but yeah, for now investors are worried about this headline, and that's why Nvidia is getting sold off today. But a lot of the other stocks are also getting sold off, and this is mainly just because of the tariffs, really. Just the fear of tariffs. Obviously, when there's fear in the market, things usually get sold off, and they get sold off aggressively, especially since in this market, a lot of stocks are considered overvalued, which means that they are trading way above their fair price. And this tends to happen in a bull market. If it gets really excessive, it's called a bubble. And I wouldn't say that we're in a bubble yet. I definitely think that things are starting to get cheap here, especially Nvidia, which I've talked about a lot on the channel already. And I think it just keeps getting cheaper and cheaper. And eventually, the sellers will realize that they are selling off possibly the greatest company when it comes to this AI revolution. Nvidia is in a prime spot when it comes to AI because they obviously develop the chips that pretty much every other company over here in this tech sector uses. And yeah, they're definitely not going anywhere. So I guess we'll see if their stock price continues to drop because in my opinion, it's definitely a buy the dip opportunity. I think Nvidia is closer to 170, 180 by the end of the year. But that's just my take. So now let's talk a bit about the indices. So the S&P was down 1% today. As you can see, in the morning, it was actually let me zoom in a little bit. In the morning, it actually went green for a tiny bit. Um, but then over the day, it just continued selling off, and somewhere around noon, we got the the tariffs news, and yeah, that just extended the decline even further. Um, and we ultimately ended up 1% in the red. The Nasdaq was down 2%, which also had a very rough day, and it just kept selling off all throughout. And the reason the Nasdaq is down more than the S&P today is because of that Nvidia news that we just talked about. Basically, Nvidia is a huge part of the Nasdaq, and obviously, when Nvidia drops, most of the other tech stocks drop, and the Nasdaq is made up primarily of tech stocks, so obviously, that one's going to take the biggest beating when it comes to a tech sell-off. And then the Dow was actually only down a third of a percent. The Dow actually was green for most of the day until the tariff news came around. Then it kind of dropped a lot. But a third of a percent really isn't too bad in the grand scheme of things. Check year to date, that the Dow is actually up now. It was down about 3% at the bottom, which was March 13th. That is so far what seems to be the bottom. We could obviously go lower. I guess we'll see if we do. It all depends on how flawless April 2nd goes. If you don't know, April 2nd is the day when Trump officially puts in his tariffs on a ton of countries, and as he calls it, American Liberation Day. And basically, a lot of people are unsure about the implications of this, or they're worried about kind of, what's gonna, like, how are the other countries gonna retaliate against this? Because obviously, if they just follow their instructions that we give them, and I guess that would be the ideal scenario. But obviously, China's going to start slapping us back with a ton of their own tariffs, and as we've seen today, they're already fighting back with this Nvidia headline. And yeah, if that continues, we could get into some serious trade wars, and that obviously wouldn't be good for the stock market. And that's why the S&P and all the other indices and a lot of individual stocks have just been getting crushed lately. Really, starting February 19th, right here, we had a big decline. The Dow was down 8% over around a month, and the S&P was down 10, and the Nasdaq was down around 14. Now we've seemed to have rebounded a bit, and things are looking actually really solid until today, when everything is looking pretty rough again, and that's not what you love to see. Now, one more thing I do want to look at is this graph right here, which shows us which companies performed the worst today in the S&P 500. And let's just start from the top. First, we have Super Microcomputer, SMCI. That is no surprise. This is probably the most volatile stock in the S&P 500, and it always tends to go up, down 10% on these big red days or big green days. It's just really a crazy stock. Then we're going to skip over Moderna because that stock's been in the gutter as of lately. Just keeps dropping. Actually, the minimum market cap required to get accepted to the S&P 500 is 20 billion, and Moderna actually is below that now. As you can see, they're way below that. So that's pretty interesting. But then we have ANET, Arista, and we have Vistra, and those two are very closely tied to Nvidia. So that's why those two are down a lot. Then obviously we have Nvidia itself was down 5.7%. I believe that's about 150 billion, something like that, of market cap, or maybe even more, that they just erased in one day. So that's obviously pretty brutal. And then right here we also have Tesla, which was down 6%. This is probably because of the auto tariffs that Trump announced. Tesla's not gonna it's not gonna have fun with these auto tariffs. And actually, another stock that's not gonna have fun with these tariffs is General Motors, GM. They are down 7% after hours, after going down 3% on the day. And this just sucks to see, because they just had a partnership with Nvidia and things were looking fine, and they're going to be developing self-driving cars and it's going to be awesome. But yeah, these auto tariffs really just don't seem to help any of these automakers. And on the right, you can also see Mercado Libre was down 5% today, and also Ford was down like 4%, something like that. So really just a rough day for these automakers. And now to close out, I do want to emphasize the importance of these red days. Even though it sucks in the short term, red days are actually a healthy part of the market, and so are corrections. This 10% correction that we've had lately, it's completely normal. It happens, well, not all the time, but it usually happens either once a year or once every 2 years. And we had one in 2024, which was August 5th, which was a 10% crash on the S&P. Then we had one in 2023, which was, I believe, right after summer. It was somewhere between September and November. And that was also around a 10 to 15% correction on the S&P. And, stocks recovered. 2023 was one of the best years for stocks, and so was 2024. And it just goes to show that stocks don't go up in a straight line. There will be red days, and you kind of just have to deal with it. And if you can't handle the stress of red days like these, then you're probably either investing too much, or you shouldn't be investing in risky stocks. You should just buy an index fund and just chill. But ultimately, these stocks like Nvidia or Tesla or Palantir, like, they do play out in the long term if you really believe in their thesis or in what they do. And sometimes they might go down because the macro environment is challenging, like it is right now. But eventually, if you are correct on your thesis, they should go up. And maybe right now we're in a little bit of a uncertain situation with the Trump tariffs and just the Trump administration in general. They've been very kind of unpredictable. Like, Trump could say that he's putting like 100% tariffs on China, and then 2 hours later he just tweets that, never mind guys, it was just a joke. So yeah, that's kind of the Trump administration summed up in two sentences. But yeah, I guess hopefully we continue the small rally that we got after the 10% correction, and hopefully this bleeding stops. But it all comes down to April 2nd, really, which is, I think, yeah, it's like a week away now. We're actually getting very close to it. I think that day will decide everything, or not everything, but it will decide the short-term direction of the markets. And I expect to see some more pain before April 2nd actually happens, because stocks do usually get sold off going into an uncertain event like April 2nd. Because, investors would rather just be on the safe side and buy bonds or something, or treasuries or whatever it is, because stocks are risky. They can go down a lot, but they do go up a lot too. And it all depends on, yeah, I'm repeating myself here, but it all depends on April 2nd. So I think we're just going to wrap it up here. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. I hope you were able to learn something new today. And if you enjoyed, consider dropping a sub And let me know in the comments if you are buying this dip and which stocks you're looking into right now. And yeah, I'll see you next time.